Good morning, everyone. How are y'all doing? We're good? Okay. I'm pumped to be kicking this off today, and I'm thrilled to be back at the gathering. It's my second time here. It's such an inspiring and cool event, and I'm thrilled to be up on stage this morning. In my work at the Globe and Mail, I work with a number of incredible brands and help them with storytelling and content marketing. But cult brands are something entirely different. Cult brands are indelible and enduring. They're not faddish or ephemeral. They symbolize a lifestyle and an identity to their loyal customers. These brands really represent a cultural shift, often starting with a small group of devoted followers that spread the gospel. So when I think about cult brands, I really can think of no better example than Lululemon, the athletic apparel retailer based in Vancouver, BC. So it's with genuine excitement and enthusiasm that I invite to the stage this morning the founder of Lululemon and the author of Little Black Stretchy Pants, Chip Wilson.
Thanks, Catherine. Thank you.
Have a seat. Thank you so much for being here this morning.
Isn't this exciting? Sorry about the podium here. Hi, everyone underneath there.
All right, so let's kick things off. Chip, you've been called a visionary, an ideas to execution guy, and those are all true, but when I was doing my research on you, what really struck me about you was that you're almost like this social anthropologist. You are a keen observer of the human condition, someone who sort of reframes problems, sees patterns, and builds businesses based upon those observations. And you really, to me, had this way of like untangling the roots of human behavior and just really understanding what people wanted. And one of the examples is yoga in the 90s. You really forecasted this trend and seized upon it in a way that no one else really did. And so can you take us back to that time? Where were you in life, and how did yoga sort of become on your radar?
Well, I mean, it was a beautiful speech last night. Thanks. Kind of moving into this, I was a Calgary boy, but I went to California every summer because that's where my grandparents were, and I saw the surfing trend. So I saw this, like these Australians came to California, clothing started to change, and I went, oh, you know, my mom's a sewer, my dad's a phys ed teacher, I know I can do this. So I went back, and really it was that cult and that tribe of surfers. There was maybe 1,000 of them worldwide, and they were like beautiful bodies and tanned and blonde, and everyone wanted to be a surfer, you know, so they were kind of that, they were iconic. And every girl was telling their boy, go buy those shorts. I'm sure if you buy those shorts, you'll look like that guy, you know? So as the surf business went up and then it went down, skateboarding went up and skateboarding went down. So I took the surf skateboarding business to Europe and Japan and Canada. I was never in the States. Nobody ever knew about me in the States. And then it just so happened I had moved to Vancouver, and Whistler became the capital for snowboarding because of the glacier there that was open all summer long. So then I got into snowboarding, but then I was super authentic at snowboarding because it was something Canada could own, and definitely Whistler and Vancouver could own. So notwithstanding, it's actually started in Calgary with the snowboard shop, but that's another story. But so then, you know, I saw these trends, and I saw how a small group of people who were fanatic about something that was really endorphin producing. So just like coffee or sex or, you know, whatever it is, it's the same drug. And so then that sets the basis for yoga, I guess is what you're asking. And then how did I come to that? Is that what you're doing? I mean, what I noticed...
Because in between that point, you had sold your business just to...
Yeah, I sold West Beach, that's
yes.
right. So I had $800,000.
Yes.
And at the age of 42 or something like that. So let's see, what did I notice? The number one thing I read was 60% of the graduates out of university were women. And, when I was in university at U of C and U of A, that was like 30%. And it was like, I knew there was, from working in Africa with, the idea was to provide education for women because they'd wait longer to have children and have fewer of them. So I know when I got out of university, all women had children at the age of 23. Now I knew it would be 32. It just like the pill and everything shifted things like dramatically. So, so I went, wow, this is going to, never before has there been a target market 23 to 32 that has existed before. So women that are highly educated, professional, they own their own condo, they're traveling, they're stylish, and man, are they taking care of themselves. They're highly athletic. And then there's a whole theory behind that, which is, which, I can go into it for like 20 minutes or we can go into something else, but I think in the book I've delivered to you, I think it's, I'll just go shortly. I think it had a lot to do with breast cancer of women. It had a lot to do with the pill, I think was probably the 10 greatest inventions of all time, which changed dramatically how men approach women, how women approach marriages, that type of thing. Because of, I think, women started working so hard in the 80s and 90s, they had to work and take care of the house and everything else. I think they gave up working out and sleep, and I think they got breast cancer in the 90s, was rampant. I think girls started rejecting how their mothers wore clothing, of the power clothing of the suits in the 80s, and they wanted to look different. And I think cartoons started showing girls as superheroes with Lycra clothing on, and I think they took that on. I think you had single fathers from divorces that started to put, in order to spend time with their daughters, they became coaches of baseball, soccer, that type of thing. So I think girls grew up and they went, I know I'm going to get divorced when I grow older, because it seemed like all parents were divorced. So if I'm going to get divorced, I better have a great education. I better be landing on my own feet. So when I have kids, I'm totally able to take care of myself. And that whole thing changed. I saw all that, put it all together, and then created a product around it.
You saw that demographic coming, and it's basically your archetype. It's like the muse, the Supergirl.
Right.
You've named her Ocean. It's so specific. Even in your book or something I read, she's not 31, she's not 33,
Right.
she's 32. And it's remarkable because we take that demographic for granted. I mean, I probably was that demographic
You were
at some
that,
point.
yeah.
But that was something entirely new, and I think Lululemon was really at the forefront of that.
Right.
Which is incredible.
And I think 32, I put that age back in 1998.
Yeah.
And the reality of it is that age is probably, even though I said that age should never change, the real thing is that what is the age women are at when they're at their most powerful? And I think that it's now probably 35. I would say that, and we can see with egg freezing of women, and that could easily move to 40, 45 in the next 20 years.
Mm-hmm. So this woman that you were targeting with your athletic apparel wasn't just the consumer. You also wanted her to be the employee, the guest, the educator.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about how you were planning to attract this woman into your organization. What were you going to do differently if you were going to entice that woman to work for you?
Well, I knew that there was nothing worse than walking into La Senza or something like that, or some, East Coast apparel, fast fashion, and you've got a 17-year-old there that's delivering fashion. Like, oh, it looks pretty on you, or very nice. The thing about technical clothing is that, and I think we invented this for Tesla and Apple, quite frankly, is that it's how to deliver a technical product made beautiful directly to a customer, and really the value is in what they can't see. So if you're delivering something they can't see, then you've got to have a different delivery system. And the delivery system had to be with highly intelligent, you couldn't call them salesmen anymore, so I called them educators. And of course, the best people ended up being women, one, because they love fashion and yoga, and we started off on that, but also because they were the best educators. So then, how do you pay, make the system work where you can pay these women and develop them to be future CEOs in this old system. So I had to get rid of the wholesale system, go direct, so I had double the margin, and I gave a big part of that margin then to put training and development of these women to be future CEOs. That's how I looked at it. And so then because of all that, then we had this delivery system which worked, paid for it. They became incredible, and the whole company went.
And you paid them more.
Oh yeah, we paid them at least 30% more than anyone else was paying them, and we could get the cream of the crop.
Right, and you heavily invested in their personal development. That was a very core element of the culture at Lululemon. So maybe walk us through a few of the, the types of training that your staff would have.
Right. So what I really need to do, I read the book The E-Myth. I don't know if anyone's read it, but it was really about how to set up a company as though the entrepreneur could like go on vacation or walk out any time. So basically setting it up like a franchise. So I went, what kind of training and development can I do in 2 weeks? So it was the psychology of achievement, 7 habits of highly effective people, the goal, which we talked about, and then the landmark form, which was a course, and I know there's one more in there, but I can't remember it right now. Anyway, we created a linguistic abstraction, what I call, so 30 terms and definitions. And if I have to say that for any company, like what are the 5 books the owners believe in, and what are the 30 terms and definitions that creates a culture, and then we were able to explode. But the basis of it really was, like, in a company, everyone thinks they have integrity, but if everyone has a different definition of integrity, there's no integrity. So to give you an example of one of the 30 terms would be, we do what we say we will do when we say we will do it in the expected way. And if we can't get it done, then we reset the conditions of satisfactions and the buy-win dates, and we clean up the mess for us being out of integrity.
Very, very specific.
Right. Yeah.
I'm fascinated by this, the fact that you created your own language, really, a way of communicating. We've talked about in other sessions the importance of communicating. You can be the smartest person in the room, but if you can't communicate what you need or what you need people to do or to motivate them, you're not going to be successful.
Right.
And some of the linguistic abstractions that stood out to me, giving without expectation of return. Can you walk us through what that would mean?
Well, that's actually the trigger that had me think about what business I wanted to go into, and it wasn't so. Up until the age of 42, I was in survival mode, and I would bet 99% of people are in here in survival mode, meaning that you're just trying to feed the family and make the mortgage, and really you have to give up your integrity, you have to give up the way that you'd really like to be in society, to be with, in order to take care of necessities. It took a lot for me to get over this bridge of, I'm going to be the opposite. I'm going to give without expectation of return. And so what happened in that is something that Brian Tracy calls the law of attraction. I changed who I was, and consequently, the world changed around me. So it did. I just started attracting people who, I seemed to be the type of person where people wanted to work with me, do things for me, be with me, buy from me, and I think it comes down to probably the word authentic.
It just resonates, especially the opening keynote from Ryan Gill, one of the founders of the conference, talking about empathy and just putting out something in the world without the expectation of getting anything in return. But life has a way of rewarding you potentially down the road for just not expecting anything. So I thought that was really interesting, that was like a core element of your business.
Yeah, and because we had no money, then that's where that whole community thing came from, because we decided, okay, well, what can we do for all these yoga instructors? So it's kind of like then we cleared out there was no space for yoga instructors, so we'd clear out our store and let them teach there so they could make money.
Right.
And then once we didn't need that anymore, then a whole thing be based on how can we help every business that we're associated with that actually we're paying to make them better. And even to the point where we we would pay in net 5 days if I had the money, just to help them out. And then because of that, I didn't realize what had happened, but because we were paying the best, just because we wanted them to be successful, like with our manufacturers, we got the best sewers, the best technique, the quickest delivery. We could change things on the fly. Like the background conversations about giving before expectation of return, not just with suppliers, but your wife, your husband, your friends, everything else, it all comes back.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, I mean, part of the buy-in you were getting, do you think part of it is because your mission was so, it spoke to so many people? Like you have this very clear mission statement and set of values that really probably resonated with a lot of people, whether they worked for you or they were your suppliers. And you've said before, you're not a wellness business.
No.
Right?
No.
So maybe walk us through the mission statement and whether or not you at the time, like how you came about that.
Well, our first mission statement was we provide components for people to live a longer, healthier, and more fun life. And then we changed that about 5 years in into we elevate the world from a place of mediocrity to greatness. And really a lot of that came through the Landmark Forum. And so it's a transformational course, definitely a transformational course. So, and really it comes down to the word choice. So I think I have choice in life, but the reality of it is that the experiences in life that I have continue to narrow and narrow and narrow choices. So consequently, if you look at grandparents, for instance, and you're having a talk with them, you go, oh, you're impossible. Your mind's so closed, you know, like, I don't know, my mom is an immigrant from Ireland, and yet she's sitting there in San Diego and can do nothing but complain about the Mexicans. Do you know? It's like crazy. But anyway, she's a no choice.
Right.
And what I discovered as a human being is that, like, in business processes, cars that I buy, ways that I communicate, it's all a choice. And as a leader, there are a million different ways of being a leader, and I can be a different leader in every situation. And then in a creative business, of course, was being able to sit in what I call amnesia. So I wake up in the morning and I pretend I have amnesia. I have no past. I have no future. In other words, we have no, if we wake up with amnesia and you get hit in the head, then you have no future. Why don't you have a future? Because if you think of every thought about our future is only given to us from experiences of the past. We have no past, we have no future, then all we have is the present. And the present, if you really look at it, is where all major creativity occurs. So and inside that present is where you absolutely have free choice. So that's basically the premise of the Landmark course. And when you have a company of 20, 30, 40, 50,000 people, and they're all on that same linguistic abstraction, and they all come from choice, amazing things can happen.
How do you get to that presence state? Is it through exercise, like physical activity? Is it through meditation? Like, how do you get there?
Well, how I first got there was that, you know, as a high-end athlete for a lot of my life, and it was easy, like the endorphins from that, what people naturally call the runner's high.
Right.
Okay, so that's there. If you've been in the runner's high, I know for me that I'm super present. I make decisions really well, and I never really knew why. But, and then when I got this distinction at the Landmark course about choice, I went, oh, that's what's happening to me. And then I started to think, well, how do I explain being in the moment to people that don't know? But it's really, if you look at a 3-year-old kid, they have no past, they have no future, and they're the most creative people in the whole world, right? Like you're right there, aren't you? Yeah. And then if you look like an 85-year-old man who's told they have 3 months to live, they could give a shit about their past life. They have no future. They're looking at every blade of grass blowing in the wind. And I think that when people talk about drugs and alcohol, people aren't, they're not escaping anything. I think they're moving to the present. Because if you really think, I know nobody's in here has been drunk, I'm sure, but what happens is that if you really analyze it, what alcohol and drugs do is that it eliminates the past. So then we have no future. Suddenly everything's pretty funny and pretty fun.
Right.
And that's where we as human beings should naturally be moving to 1,000 times a day.
Okay, but here's the thing. If there's no future, then how do you set goals for the future? Because I know you're very much into goal setting. Every one of your educators has to set, I believe, 1 year, 5 year, 10-year goals, to the point they post them in the break rooms. It's very important to you. That's something I know you've written goals on your website. I'm going to ask you about those later. But so how do you rectify that?
Well, what happens is that if I'm not in the moment setting my goals, then I'm setting goals that are pretty weak. So I'll give you a weird example. So there was a time I was 242 pounds, and I went, okay, I'm going to set a goal by, I don't know, the end of 2019 to be 220 pounds. Okay, like December 31st, 220, I'm going to be 220 pounds. That's a specific metric with a by-win date. But that's all based on being 242 pounds, on something that I already know. Where if I was to wake up in the hospital with amnesia from a car accident and I went, God, I'm kind of like, I want to do something different, I might look in all the medical books, blah, 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 and it would say someone of 6'3", that's 64 years old, should be 208 pounds. Well, then I'd go, okay, I'm going to set my goal for 208 pounds. So what I'm saying is that if I set my goals based on the experiences of my past, I'm going to end up with a mediocre future.
Interesting. Let's change gears slightly. I want to talk to you a bit about how the way you spent on brand. It was very different than other, say, more traditional organizations where 10% of sales would be allocated to maintain and grow the brand.
Right.
But you spent in different ways. You talked about sort of hiding those costs in other areas. So how did you build the brand Lulu? What are some examples of things you did that weren't really being done at the time, but that helped you be successful?
Well, there's probably only 2 other companies, maybe even Victoria's Secret, I forget, but the gap was there, but they were still selling other people's jeans. We were probably the first to be making our own clothing and selling it of our own stores, so we had a different business model again.
The vertical retail.
Right. So then suddenly then we had retail stores of our own selling our own brands. So you could say that store location and the banner on the store was a big part of that.
Right. And before you move on, store location, how did you decide where to locate your stores?
Well, at the time, there was this company down in Seattle called Starbucks, and we had basically the same customer. And I went and said, they've done millions of dollars on all of this. I'll just go set up where their first 3 stores
Genius. Yeah, I love that.
And so then, so I looked at brand and I went, well, I don't have any money. And really, when I was in the surfskate snowboard business, I was really in the first 3 people in all those businesses. So I found, and I never had any money, but what I found is that whenever anyone from the press wanted to know anything about those sports, they'd phone me up. So I got free editorial all the way through.
Right.
And then I couldn't, I never had the money to compete with the public snowboard companies who would hire someone for $1 million. So for $1 million, I would go and get 60 or 70 snowboarders. And I found it way more effective. They were far more authentic. They really understood the mountain and the village and the area that they were in. They were easy to be with. They didn't have an ego. And so when I started Lululemon then, it was I'm going to go find these people again. And fortunately in yoga, it's not like Nike or Adidas was paying a yoga instructor $1 million. They didn't even know about yoga.
Right.
So I was able to get basically every good person in every community being a Lululemon ambassador.
Right. Almost, sort of pre-influencer marketing, but you really tapped into this idea of finding the person in the community that is connected and having them test the gear, right, and give feedback. Was that part of it?
Right. I never sponsored anybody. I gave them clothing, and it was always from the point, I think if you say to somebody, I want to sponsor you, and you give your clothing, they go, yeah, give me the clothing, and I'll do whatever. But I think if people know that they're testers and they're giving back and they're making the company grow, and they believe in the ethos of the brand and the vision and the values and the people, then they want to be on that train that says, I think, again, we were talking about Apple last night, they want to be on that train to grow that company.
Right.
And I think that's, so the happiness and the love of like, oh my God, someone's actually making athletic clothing without seams between the legs. Someone's actually making something that doesn't stink.
Yeah.
Someone's actually making something that fits a woman's body. Right. Rather than shrink it and pink it,
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, high quality garments, I think we can all agree. Like if you've ever, all of you have some sort of Lululemon apparel. I know I do. And I have these great pants that I've had for about 5 years, and I recommend them to like every woman in my family, honestly. But I didn't appreciate the focus on quality until reading about just how you say design those little black stretchy pants. Like, can you walk this group? Some of them may know, but just the level of detail and thought behind those pants is astounding. You just didn't see that, partially because no one was really thinking of women athletes at the time either.
Well, I don't even think Nike and Adidas were thinking of athletes. I think they were shoe people that didn't really understand apparel. And the genesis that really comes from, again, surfing, when I think Quicksilver figured out that, hey, surfers have a very small waist, big butts and big thighs, and they're crouching down all the time. If you even go back to 1998, there wasn't a piece of clothing that you bent down on where your butt crack didn't show. And clothing didn't move. And I think it was still kind of stuck for men anyway, in the 1950s where pants were above above the belly button. And it wasn't really till surfers started wearing really low cut fronts and very high cut backs, it changed the whole marketplace on that. So I looked at that and I went, now as an athlete, this is something I can wear, okay? So I took that into snowboard gear and everything else, but when I started with yoga, it was much different than what it is now, because hot yoga was like what everyone was doing, and you wanted the very minimal amount to wear. And so women who were doing yoga, again, they were 22, 23, 24 at the time, incredible shape. So it was actually a very, very low rise at the front and a high rise at the back. Different now from body shaping, which is a whole different story. But I brought these $40,000 machines over from Japan to Vancouver so they'd put two pieces of fabric together like this with if you look inside all your clothing, it has a really bad seam like this. You can't do that in athletic clothing. If you look at Nike and Adidas, they still do that in between the legs of their marathon shorts. So I think that's a big part. And then thinking about with nylon, like Nike and Adidas, for instance, would use polyester because they have to go through the wholesale system, so they need some cheap fabric in order to make it work. And polyester stinks. Where Lululemon and Arc'teryx, the companies that I work with now, use nylon so that it doesn't stink. It doesn't attract the bacteria, and I can put features into it that'll make it work. But
and you pre-shrunk the fabric and pre-washed it too.
That is another thing.
Which was big. Like you go out for a run and you wash your clothing, you don't want it to shrink like 2 sizes. Like that, so I thought that was also a really thoughtful.
Don't you go into every store and you look at a garment and go, I would love that. The first time I put it in the wash, it's not going to look like that anymore. Yeah. Everything I make is always like hot water, hot dryer 5 times. It's got to last 5 years. It's like, as we talk about it, I mean, there's this movement in marketing now. I mean, whether or not it's a movement, but there's a term for it called inclusive marketing. And a lot of big companies are starting to look and basically be innovative based on who they're excluding in the market. So for example, IKEA had this big campaign called Disables. So they created these products that allowed people with disabilities to use and engage with their products. Microsoft created the adaptive controller.
for people with disabilities. They're actually starting like a geriatric gaming line of products. But I'm thinking at the time Lululemon came on the scene, it really was inclusive marketing because you were targeting a demographic that really wasn't represented in the press, like women, athletes, and creating clothing and products specifically for women, which seems like an obvious thing now, but that had really never been done. And do you think that's maybe part of the reason Lululemon continues to do so well, like double-digit top line, bottom line growth? It continues to just capitalize because it's one of the only sports retailers that really, they didn't reverse engineer men's products for women.
Right.
I just think that's like really fascinating. I don't know if you agree if that's the reason, but there's a lot of other factors.
Yeah, there's a lot of institutional knowledge about women and their bodies and how they move, which of course, as you might suspect, are way different than men. And I think that even when Lululemon started in 1998, it really wasn't until maybe 2012 that Nike even kind of woke up and went, "What's this woman thing all about?" So I think Lululemon has such, like, again, the institutional knowledge is so deep, and I think people look to Lululemon for what women want, but by the time they get there, Lululemon's already working 5 years in the future. It's a lot like if Lululemon went into shoes right now trying to compete with Nike. Nike, is working 5 years in the future, and they're based on like what they're doing now. Well, they got to go way beyond that. And
right.
So it's going to be very, very. Normally, it would be difficult to beat, but now I bought Amer with my Chinese partners in Tencent. So we bought Arc'teryx, Wilson, Balls, Atomic, Solomon, Peak Performance, a couple others.
Whoa.
So we're going to surround Lululemon. Even though I'm a Lululemon's largest shareholder, I think that market is so big that it needs some competition.
Wow. I mean, you've just talked about some brands that you've just acquired, but what brand right now do you admire and you think they're doing things really well, and why?
Well, there's a reason Amazon's on top. And I think it's because Jeff Bezos, even though they went public, wouldn't bow to analysts who said, "Start making a profit. Start making a profit. Want to see something? Like these? They're really not very smart people on Wall Street. They just, it's impossible to know what's going on inside of the company or what's happening 5 years in the future and where to invest and what to do. So, for him to say no, we're going to keep doubling down till we have such a massive economy of scale that we're unbeatable forever. And I think that's the type of company, because I think this is actually going to change the world, and it's why China, I think, is going to pass the U.S. by, because the U.S. and Canada, because they're out for the whole of the company, where in the United States and Canada, there's still this thing about the minority or the 1 or 2% shareholder and the person that's outcast. We got to bring them along, and the whole litigation is like phenomenal around it. So, and because we're living in this digital world where I'm getting like 400 times more work done today than I did like 12 years ago. So companies are moving that much quicker, and they have to make decisions a lot quicker. In China, they can make decisions like that, and over here, it takes like forever. You can just see the pipelines in Canada to give you an idea.
Right, for sure. I do want to talk about the role of corporations and the sort of changing definitions of growth, because as much as these companies are growing, I think, given like the Business Roundtable coming out and the idea of capitalism moving to something more sustainable and inclusive, not just about satisfying the shareholders, do you see this as coming to life, and do you think that consumers will vote based on sort of a brand's purpose, or at least not just being about making sure the shareholders are happy, but having sustainable practices, making sure?
Honestly, no, I don't think they will. I think my experience, when within the snowboard business, everyone like everyone said, keep making your stuff from Canada, keep making it in Canada. So we kept making it in Canada, and Burton went to China and undercut us by 20%, and people couldn't give a shit
Right,
whether
they
you
didn't
made
care.
in Canada or not. And then maybe 2007, 2008, Lululemon came out with Okoko, a very, a soy bamboo-based type thing, and we went through all that. But the reality is the people that were really interested in that type of clothing, their demographic is that they don't really like fashion, they don't really care for style, they don't want to pay for it. So and it's not like soy and bamboo were cheaper to make. I think that I personally think that training and developing people inside the company to always make the right decision in any kind of situation is the best corporate responsibility thing you can do. I think so many things are just marketing, greenwashing, or however you want to call that. I think we were always like that at Lululemon. I have a hard time believing that if it's profitable, you wouldn't want to do it. So we looked at every piece of fabric that hit the floor after cutting. We did something. We made hats, gloves, everything out of it. There was nothing. We would never let people work in a factory. The higher quality goods you make, the better you've got to treat your people. So I think a lot of people that talk like that want cheap stuff, but the cheap stuff is made in the factories that are the worst, with the worst conditions and everything else. But they don't want to pay for the expensive stuff, is where the best quality and the best way all workers in Asia are treated. It's a really weird dichotomy.
Yes. So obviously you're a successful businessman, but you are also a father to 5 boys.
Yes, yeah, very
Crazy.
happy.
A husband to Shannon, and you are involved in a number of philanthropic endeavors. I don't know if you want to give us an update on maybe the Imagine
One Day?
One Day.
Yeah, about, I guess when we went public and we made a lot of money, we decided we're going to put money into children's education. We did it ourselves. We went over there. We actually set the whole thing up and did it. We're more starters. My wife and I are, it's interesting to recognize in myself, like, I'm a starter. I'm not really like someone that just wants to get something going and have it done. So we started it, got it going. We ended up merging with the We organization out of Toronto, and now we're out of it, mostly because our life's got too complicated and we need to put it down. We have probably one of the largest foundations in Canada, and we don't know what to do with it quite yet. And so we're not a spray and pay, which is what a lot of people with philanthropy do, where they give a little bit here and a little bit there. It's such massive amount in our foundation, because basically how it works tax-wise is all my Lululemon shares are at 1 cent, and they're worth $258 now, and it's been split 3 or 4 times. So every time I've sold Lululemon shares, then I have to put money into my foundation. So but I think when I look at people like Gates or the Rockefellers, which I'm nowhere in that realm, any kind of realm at all, but they've taken their money and they've done something where you need a chunk of money like that to really change something fundamental in the world. Maybe Gates with malaria or something like that. So we're looking for that.
I'm cognizant that we're running out of time, and I said we would open up the floor for questions. I do have a couple questions here, if you don't mind. I can just maybe ask. How'd you come up with the name Lululemon?
Well, so I'm not going to tell you.
Okay.
Now,
You're gonna have to read
here's
the book.
the reason. Yeah, because I started saying it like 5 times a day, and I finally said, I better go write a book.
Yeah. Fair enough. Read the book. That's a very good teaser.
Yeah, that one I'm going to get you to.
We have another question. I've heard you mention the quote, what got me to where I am will not get me to where I'm going. Can you speak to that?
Well, I think it's the type of hello, can you hear me? The type of leader that I was when I had 12 people, and the type of leader I need to be at maybe 2,000 people, and the type of leader I need to be at 20,000 people is entirely different. And so I'd say that's the type of store I had to open up, the volume, when volume got from 5,000 pieces to 100 million pieces, something like that. Everything has to change, so what got me to where I were was not going to get me to where I'm going. So it's self-evaluating myself, and again, it's I walk into work every day going, if I had to compete against myself, who do I need to be differently? How does the company need to be different? And it allows me to do what I really loved about a lot of what Steve Jobs did, and he wasn't afraid to cannibalize what was already great, even his charger cords and everything else that we paid a fortune for.
Yes.
But I think that the world is moving too fast not to cannibalize ourselves.
Now, Chip, on your website, I wanted to get back to the goal setting. You said your goal was to hire a project manager and do 2 weird, out-of-the-box projects by December 31st. So have you accomplished any of those goals?
Well, actually, I just set that goal, and I believe that's for 2/20.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so
you have some time, I guess, because it's only.
Yeah, I have about 30 projects, and I just found I needed, I just didn't have. Here's my problem. So it's partly that question we had before, like I need to be different. I had some psychologists take a look at me and how I operate. They went, I want to do everything myself. And so now I understand, like, my trigger is that when I feel overloaded and I have too much work to do, it's because I've failed to delegate and I've failed to train and develop other people to do what I need to do. So that was the trigger, that I recognized that I had all these projects, I was getting downloaded, and there's lots of people out there that want to have fun doing the things, and I got crazy ideas.
Can't wait to hear about those. Chip, on behalf of everyone here at the gathering, I want to thank you so much for your time this morning. It was really great talking to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.